Today I'm going to show you how to craft a perfect list of schools to apply to. So if you've been struggling to make your college list, this video is for you. There are a lot of things to consider when choosing what colleges you have the privilege of sending an $80 application fee to, along with all your blood, sweat, and tears from the past 4 years of high school. So these aren't easy decisions to make. Back when I was in high school, I just went on the US News rankings and picked the top 20 schools that they had on their list, but my guidance counselor got mad at me and made me just redo my list. In hindsight, I kind of wish I did apply to just the top 20 schools to see, what would happen, but it was probably for the best that I didn't. Having a balanced list of schools to apply to helps make sure you can optimize your chances of getting accepted into at least one school that you'd be interested in actually attending. So in your decision process, first, you're going to want to consider how many schools to actually apply to. Most people do 10 to 15 schools, some people do only 8, some people do as many as 20. Me personally, I applied to 27 schools, mostly just because I was really paranoid throughout the whole college application process. But for most people, I would recommend aiming for somewhere in the 10 to 15 range of schools to apply to, especially considering that the application fees can really add up if you don't have fee waivers, so you don't want to apply to too many schools. And then within your list of schools, you want to make sure that you have a balance of safety, target, and reach schools. Safety schools have a high acceptance rate and your stats are usually well above their typical range for admitted students. Target schools, on the other hand, have slightly lower acceptance rates, still usually in the mid double digits, and your stats are usually around their range for typically admitted students. And then reach schools have very low acceptance rates, sometimes even in the single digits, and oftentimes having good stats that are within their range are still not a guarantee of getting accepted. Reach schools are places like Harvard, Stanford, MIT, etc. I would typically recommend applying to 1 to 2 safety schools, 2 to 4 target schools, and the rest being reach schools. It doesn't make a whole lot of sense to apply to 10 safety schools, which is something that I did in the midst of my foolish panic. I'd say that if your stats are well above their typical range and you consider them to be a safety school, then there's really no reason why you wouldn't get into that school unless they're yield protecting you or something like that. And at least in my experience, a lot of times students aren't super excited about attending their safety schools as their number one choice. So safety schools are typically considered more of like a backup school in case you aren't able to get in anywhere else or you aren't able to attend one of the other schools you got into for whatever reason. So I would say that you can kind of think of your college list as being an upside down triangle. You have 1 to 2 safety schools at the bottom, then a few target schools, and then a lot of reach schools. The reason why I recommend applying to a lot of reach schools if you can is that their acceptance rates are typically really low, and a lot of them are like sub 5%. So having multiple of them on your list increases the likelihood that you get into at least one of them, if not more. And the reality is that even if the quality of education isn't so much different at the top schools, the opportunities and connections available are what makes them really worthwhile. And by that I mean that the calculus you learn at the University of Massachusetts is going to be the same exact calculus you learn at Stanford University. It's not like there's some secret calculus that you can only learn at Stanford, that Stanford's gatekeeping. But what Stanford does have that the University of Massachusetts might not have is the wealth of opportunities and funding for research and all sorts of programs. Not to mention the connections and brand name that can get your foot into the door at some of the biggest companies in basically any industry. So if you want to, I'm all for the idea of you applying to every single school in the Ivy League. Now that you have an idea of what buckets your school should fall into in your college list, how exactly do you decide which specific schools to apply to? One of the most important things to consider when deciding which colleges to apply to is the academic program of a given school, because you want to see how strong their department is for the major that you want to study. Because it would really stink to want to be a business major and then attend a college where you find out that they don't even have an undergraduate business program. I mean, it would really stink to be a business major at all, but I digress. You can use websites like US News or Niche to get a sense of how strong a given school is for math or computer science or really any other major. But I would also recommend doing your research directly on the website for a given school's department. There you'll be able to see what kinds of classes there are, who the faculty are, and what opportunities are available there. You also want to know how big are the classes and how well you'll be able to build a relationship with your professors. Will you feel like your education is valued, or are you just another source of money for the school? What opportunities and programs does that school have that relate to your field of study? Where do people in your major from that school typically go on to work? The main point of school is to get your degree, so you should be making sure that you're actually getting a good education. So one of the first things you want to keep in mind when you're looking at schools to apply to is whether or not that would be a good school for what you want to study. One more important thing to consider when deciding what colleges to apply to is what life is like for the students there. Do they have clubs related to the things that you enjoy? What is the student life there like? If you're interested in partying, what is the social scene on campus like? If you're a loser that wants to join Greek life, what is that like at the schools you're looking into? Because while you are there to be a student and get your education and go to classes and learn, you're not going to be spending 100% of your time with your head between books, so it's going to be important to know what other things you can do on campus. One thing you will definitely want to consider when trying to decide what colleges to apply to is the availability of opportunities at a given school. Things like how easy is it to get research and jobs on campus? These are things that are going to be really important to building up your skills and your resume outside of your academic classes, so you'll want to make sure that your school can afford these opportunities to you. You'll also want to know what special programs they have that would be applicable to you, whether that be a pre-professional program or some special funding that you can apply for. What kind of support systems does your school offer? This could look like how the resources are that they have to help you study, how good their facilities are, what is academic advising like, and how helpful is it? I'd say one of the biggest things you really want to keep in mind when deciding what colleges to apply to is how well that school would be able to help you in your future goals. You have to realize that college is not the end goal. Unfortunately, we live in a society and we have to get jobs eventually, so how well do the schools you're considering do that? If you attend one of the so-called elite universities, having that brand name on your degree is enough to get your foot in the door at a lot of places. For example, having a Stanford or Berkeley degree carries a lot of weight for the tech companies in Silicon Valley. But there are also a lot of other factors at play here, like the strength of the alumni network. How easy is it to get mentorship in whatever capacity you're looking for? If there are alumni from your school at the company you want to work for especially, getting a referral from them would be really great for your job prospects. There are also some companies that prefer to hire graduates from only certain schools, so if you want to work at such a company, you'll really want to make sure that those schools are on the list of schools you want to apply to. There are so many other factors to consider for a college list besides just academics and future prospects, and these will really come down to your individual preference and what you're looking for in a school. How big of a school do you want to go to? A large school like UT Austin is going to be really different from a small school like Keene State College. What is the social scene of the school like? Going to USC, which is a known party school, is going to be really different from going to UCSD, which is called UC Socially Dead for a reason. What is the weather of campus like? Going to school in LA is going to be really different from going to school in Boston. What is school spirit like? Do you want to go somewhere where people are really excited about school spirit, like Clemson University, or do you want to go somewhere like NYU where students don't even know their own mascot? What kind of campus are you looking for? Do you want a large suburban campus like Stanford, or a random collection of buildings in the middle of a city like Boston University? What are sports like? Do you want to go to a really sport-heavy school like University of Alabama, or do you not really care and would be fine at a school like Smith College? What are housing options like? Do you want to go somewhere with really nice dorms like Vanderbilt University, or do you want to go live in a rat-infested shoebox like Berkeley? How close to home is the school? Do you want to live just an hour drive away, or do you want to move all the way across the country? There are a lot of things to consider, so really take your time and list out all the things you want in a school and consider how important each factor is to you. And then you can find the schools that best match what you're looking for. Perhaps the biggest concern for a lot of students is the cost of actually attending college. So when you're deciding what schools to apply to, financial aid is something really important to be aware of. Typically, you'll find that it'll be a lot cheaper to go to a school in-state than out-of-state, especially for public schools. But I'd say that a common misconception that a lot of people have is that top elite universities are really expensive, meaning only rich people can afford to attend them. This is unequivocally false. Top schools have some of the best financial aid out there. Schools like Harvard and Stanford can afford to give really generous financial aid because they have such large endowments, so they really don't need to take your money just to stay afloat. They'd rather just take the best students that they can. For example, at Stanford, if your family makes less than $100,000 a year, you don't have to pay a single penny towards your education. So for me, Stanford was a lot more affordable than any of the other state schools I got into, which made the choice a lot easier ultimately. So don't let the high price tag scare you away from applying to these top schools. And one thing that I'd urge you to keep in mind when thinking of what colleges to apply to is just to keep an open mind. The idea of a dream school is a little toxic in my opinion, and you really never know where you might end up. A lot of kids get crushed when they don't get into the school they developed an unhealthy obsession with, so it's better to just keep an open mind in terms of considering what schools you could potentially be going to. And in most cases, you're going to be fine at whatever school you end up going to because your college experience is really what you make of it. And you might find that the school that's right for you may not even be a school that you were initially considering. In my case, I had no intentions of applying to Stanford because it was on the other side of the country for me, and every other school on my list was in the Northeast. I had not even a single inkling of a thought that I might get in, but I decided to shoot my shot anyway. And I think this is just to say that you really shouldn't underestimate yourself and that you shouldn't box yourself in terms of thinking of what schools you want to go to. So I hope you can create a good list of colleges to apply to. And if you need any more help deciding, leave a comment down below or check out some of my other videos.